Welcome to the webinar, Leveraging Academic Pipeline Programs in a Professoriate, the third and sadly the last of our trio of webinars on the academic pipeline. This webinar will be recorded and registrants will receive a link to the recording appearing on socialsciencespace.com. The earlier webinars can also be found there. I'm Michael Todd, the editor of Social Science Space, which is the media sponsor of today's event. Social Science Space in turn is sponsored by Sage Publishing. Before I introduce the moderators of today's webinar, perhaps you, the guests, could tell us a little bit about yourselves so our guests, our panelists, can know a bit about who they'll be talking to. We're offering a little poll for you to do that. And if you have questions for the guests, be sure to use the Q&A tab to type those in. Now let me tell you a little bit about Curtis Byrd and Rihana Mason, both of Georgia State University and our host today. They have teamed to write the new book, Academic Pipeline Project, Diversifying Pathways from the Bachelor's to the Professoriate, published open access by Lever Press, and which is giving us the basis for today's webinars and the two earlier ones. Be sure to check out, again, Social Science Space and the Academic Pipeline website for updates on those events. Dr. Rihana S. Mason is a research scientist at the Urban Child Study Center at GSU. Prior to joining the UCSC, she served as an associate professor in psychology at Emmanuel College for several years, where she helped to expand the undergraduate curriculum in psychology. She is the 2021-22 president of the Southeastern Psychological Association and a member of the Psychi Diversity Advisory Committee. Dr. Curtis Byrd is the special advisor to the provost on diversity and inclusion at Georgia State University. Dr. Byrd consults and provides leadership in GSU faculty and graduate student diversity and inclusion efforts. And most recently, he served as a research associate and consultant for the HBCU STEM Undergraduate Success Center at Morehouse College. Prior to his time at Morehouse, he served for 8 years as the Assistant Dean of Graduate Studies and Senior Associate Director of Graduate Enrollment at Clark Atlanta University. And before this, he served as Director of Special Programs and Undergraduate Research and Associate Director of the McNair Scholars Program at the University of Florida and Director of the McNair Scholars Program at GSU. Now, let's hear from Drs. Mason and Byrd.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We want to also thank Sage Publications and the Social Science Space for supporting our webinar series. We believe that the timing is right to discuss how education organizations and institutions can support learners along their journey into the workforce. We are living in a time where there are 3 generations, X, Y, and Z, that share both the classroom and the workforce. Globally, all 3 of those generations exist in an ecosystem where the appreciation of diversity, of identities and perspectives is more normalized, but also where there's a sense of belonging and cultural building that defines their decision-making. One of our goals in writing our book, Academic Pipeline Programs, Diversifying the Bachelor's to the Professoriate, was to raise the awareness of opportunities that promote readiness, training, and the attainment of various career pathways. We uniquely organized the details and best practices of 21 hallmark academic pipeline programs by drawing attention to their type, history, research, identity, inclusion, voice components, as well as their expectations and outcomes. These dimensions that I just mentioned make up our Thrive Index. Today, we will hear more about the Meyerhoff Scholars Program at the University of Maryland, College Park, and how its model has been replicated at several other institutions. Our dialogue between our panelists will highlight how institutions can leverage these programs like the Meyerhoff Scholars Program. We will learn more about important metrics of successfully supporting persons from historically underrepresented groups. And I will say thank you to all of the teachers and professors and administrators that are here with us today. I see a shout out to UMBC alumni who are with us as well. Dr. Byrd?
Dr. Byrd, you're
okay. I got it. Well, thank you so much. I was just being as polite as I can to listen to my colleague, Dr. Mason. Thank you so much, Dr. Mason. Dr. Mason and I are very excited to discuss our book with two highly accomplished individuals in higher education. Our discussion today will detail how the Academic Pipeline Programs book can be leveraged by institutions, faculty, administrators, students, and even parents in successful operations in the academic world. What is important to recognize is that although many of us know about and have academic pipeline programs on our radar, we're not aware of how they can be organized strategically and promote the advancement of students, faculty, and staff in the academy. The Academic Pipeline Programs book help institutions, administrators organize what they've already had, identify strengths, redundancies, and allow for opportunities to build out on the gaps of support needed by underrepresented groups to succeed on college campuses. Now I will discuss the academic pipe. Now to discuss successful academic pipeline initiatives, I have the pleasure of introducing our two panelists. First, I'll start with Dr. Jamal Watson. He is the editor of Diverse Issues in Higher Education, the nation's preeminent publication focused on access, diversity, and inclusion across higher education, the higher education landscape. A veteran journalist, he has written and edited for the publication since 2005. Watson is also a member of the graduate school faculty at Trinity Washington University, where he teaches and directs strategic communications and public relations program, as well as journalism media studies program. Dr. Watson earned his PhD in Afro-American Studies from the highly acclaimed W.E.B. Du Bois Department of Afro-American Studies at UMass Amherst. My wife graduated from there as well, Dr. Stephanie Evans. He's the author of the forthcoming biography on the civil rights activist and MSNBC host, Reverend Al Sharpton. And then we have Dr. Friedman Hrabowski. We are so excited that he has decided to join us and actually wrote the foreword to our book, Academic Pipeline Programs. He is the president of the University of Maryland, Baltimore County since 1992. He's a consultant on science and education, science and math education, and to national agencies and universities and school systems around the country. In 2012, he was named by President Obama to chair the President's Advisory Commission on Educational Excellence for African Americans. He leads a university that has been recognized as a model for inclusive excellence by such publications as U.S. News and World Report, which the past 10 years has recognized UMBC as a national leader in academic innovation and undergraduate teaching. In 2012, he was named one of the 100 most influential people in the world by Time magazine. Wow. And most recently, he received the American Council on Education's Lifetime Achievement Award in 2018. The University of California, Berkeley's Clark Carr Award in 2019, the University of California, San Francisco, UCSF Medal in 2012, or 2020, I'm sorry. And his most recent book, The Empowered University, examines how university communities support academic success by cultivating and empowering institutional culture. And saying that is a mouthful. My dear friend and colleague, Dr. Friedman Hrabowski, I'll hand it over to you, sir.
Thank you to both of you. I must tell you that my alumni are texting me saying, please correct Dr. Mason, who said that the Meyer program was at the University of Maryland College Park. No, it's at UMBC. I'm sure you know that it's UMBC. And we're very proud of our sister institution, and particularly of my fellow president, Darrell Pines, African-American, former dean of engineering. So we're proud of them, but they would want me to let you know in no uncertain terms, Meyerhoff is UMBC.
UMBC all day long. Yes, excuse my error.
My students say it stands for you must be clever. Remember that, all right?
Awesome.
So let me talk a few minutes about my sense of the importance of your book, let me just say that, the academic pipeline programs, the idea of understanding who's doing what, of giving institutions a chance to compare what they're doing to what others are comparing, of having some structure that you can use and looking at type of program that it is, what the context is, what the voice is, how you talk about culture. All those things are very important. So you've done something very important for the field when thinking about these programs. And we all know the problems, the challenges that students of color see their professoriate as being not representative of them. We know that. We know that well over 70% of professors are still white. We know that when talking about underrepresented minorities, you're talking 10 or 11%, depending on the type of institution that it is. And the work that my colleagues and I have done has focused heavily on the natural sciences and engineering. And so as I talk about Meyerhoff and what we do, perhaps there are parts of it that can be used in other places, in other institutions. Most important, we are a public research campus with a heavy emphasis on science, engineering, public policy areas, with about 14,000 students in the traditional programs, another 6,000 in tech programs in a training company that we have. We've got 100 plus companies on campus in our research park, with about 30% of the CEOs who are women and 25% are people of color, heavily Black. So we're very proud of that. So we like saying that when thinking about diversity, equity, and inclusion, those things are in our DNA, very much so. It's not just about me. The first sentence in the new book, The Empowered University, it's not about me, it's about us. And it's one of the points, if we're gonna make progress, it's gotta be all of us working together to do that. And so here's what I would say. My TED Talk gives the 4 fundamental principles that you'll see in the Meyerhoff program. That TED Talk is entitled The 4 Pillars of College Success in Science. I would argue that these are pillars that would be successful at any level and for any discipline. And they fit so well with the Thrive Index. They are high expectations, building community among the students, that it takes researchers to produce researchers, and then we must have rigorous evaluation. And one of the points from your books that's really important is that there are many programs and initiatives doing all kinds of good things. But the bottom line has to be, what difference do they make? We've got to look at the outcomes. Are we moving the needle? When you get a chance, look at the most recent article my colleagues and I wrote in Issues in Science and Technology. It's called Nothing Succeeds Like Success, and it's on underrepresented minorities in science. And what we do is to look at those universities that have been most successful in producing African Americans, and then those that have been most successful in producing Latinos, the Latinx population. But there's several things I want you to think about. When we talk about high expectations, and you have that that E in the Thrive, for us, it means not only the student gains from the program, but also the expectations we should have of ourselves, not just of what the students are able to achieve, but what are the expectations of the teaching and learning process and of faculty when we see that students are not doing well. And as an example, we've had a major innovation initiative for perhaps 20 years now that focuses on redesigning courses. Unfortunately, in most institutions, we are still teaching math at different levels the same way we did 20 years ago. So look at our Chemistry Discovery Center, which focuses on collaboration, group work, use of technology, real-time assessment, and then looking at how much better students are doing. And so in the Meyer program, what you'll see is that we have focused on building community among the people and talking about the expectations for the future. And so freshmen are calling themselves doctor because the idea is they're there to get to get MDs or PhDs or MD PhDs. Heavy emphasis on PhD first and MD PhD. More recently, we have also done some more with MDs because we know that there are fewer Black men in medical school today than there were in the 80s. So we've got critical issues with medicine. But similarly in science, fewer than 2% of the scientists at all the national agencies in America are Black. And a very small percentage, well under 4%, are Hispanic. And so we've got critical issues with scientific infrastructure, whether talking about the Professoriate or the agencies that are producing not only the research, but also the funding and the grants to help people out. So what I want you to think about is a theory of change. There's another piece that you'll see if you look at on my website that focuses on what we need to do to change the culture of institutions. And it does talk about how we help minority students to be more than on the periphery, how to make them mainstream, to get them to have a sense of self and to feel that they belong in that environment. And so I would argue, as we did in a report we did for the National Academies in 2011, the expanding this pipeline that we talked about there, that there are many levels we could talk about, all the way back from pre-K up to beginning college, bachelor's, grad school, postdoc, and the professoriate and others. But the place we saw that we had the greatest challenge beyond K through 12 was at the undergrad level, that the vast majority of students of color leave science within the first year or two. But what makes that even more challenging is that the vast majority of students in general leave. The higher, for all students, for white students, we're talking about literally 60% leaving. For Black students and Latinos, you're talking about 80% leaving. So many people come in with those interests. And I'm looking at natural sciences and engineering because we also need to look at social sciences. The social sciences have a dearth also in the percentage of people of color who get degrees. It's just that natural sciences and engineering is even worse than the social sciences. And so we're hitting that piece right now. And what I will tell you is this, that programs that build community and that spend time talking about the interaction between the researchers, the faculty, and the students will be those that will be more effective in having students to do well enough in the coursework that they can go into grad school. And number two, to have them inspired and elevated to the point of saying, I can do this. I can do this. If a student gets C's in the coursework, it's hard to have that student thinking that I can go to grad school. And it's hard to get into grad school, as you know, with C's. And so finally, what I want you to think about is this notion that culture, as Eric Weiner said in his book, The Geography of Bliss, culture is the sea we swim in, so all-consuming that we fail to recognize it until we step out of it and look back at it. And I'm suggesting if we're going to move the needle, we have to step out of the culture enough to put a mirror in front of ourselves in the professoriate, in the academy, and to admit that the problem is as much ours as anybody else's, and that yes, we need to keep working to produce stronger teachers and give teachers more support in K through 12, but even the teachers, even the students who come in well prepared with higher SATs and grades, they still do not succeed in the largest numbers. And so we have only about 5% of the students in America getting bachelor's degrees in the natural sciences and engineering. And final point, before I turn it over, we can get into conversation. When you look at our article, let me just take the situation of Blacks. What you'll find is that when you look at the top 10 or 15, HBCUs still do a great job. They really do. While only 20% or so of students, Black students, are in those institutions, they are heavily represented in the top 15 institutions for Blacks in producing Blacks, people who go on to get natural science and engineering PhDs. The list, we're very proud that at this point, we lead the country in producing these PhDs in natural sciences and engineering. This is the most recent data. Look at the study in issues in science and technology. UMBC is number one. North Carolina A&T is number two. Kudos to them and Harold Martin, the president there. Howard is number three, Wayne, and then Florida A&M, and then Spelman. And my friend Mary Schmidt Campbell will tell you in a heartbeat, they are the top producer of Black women who go on to get natural sciences and engineering. And I'm very proud to be an honorary Spelmanite. I have an honorary degree, one of the few men. So I'm very proud of that. And then there's there's Xavier, as you know, who does a great job with physicians, but it's number 7 or number 6 on this list. Then College Park, a sister institution, and University of Florida. I want to give both of them a shout out because other than UMBC, they're the only other predominantly white institutions in the top 10. All the others are HBCUs. And then finally, kudos to our sister institution in Maryland, Morgan State, and then Jackson State, then Morehouse, then my beloved alma mater, Hampton, Southern University, Tuskegee, and number 15 is MIT. Now that gives you the list. Now you can go on down to number 30. If you get to number 30, which is where you've got both Prairie View and Virginia Polytechnic, if an institution produces just four Blacks per year, who go on to get PhDs, they're in the top 30. That's how small the numbers are. You get my point? And so we looked at this. If we were to double the number of students from these institutions who go on to get PhDs, we would increase the percent of the number actually of African Americans getting PhDs in all of America by 30%. By just doubling these. And for Hispanics, the same thing, where two of the campuses of University of Puerto Rico is at the top, and then it's University of Texas, El Paso, and then it's University of Florida. But if we did the same thing from them, that number of PhDs, Hispanic would grow by 40%. So for Blacks, by 30% and 40%. What is my point? We need to do two things. We need to give people the chance to read your book and see what practices are working so they can start programs. But we need funding agencies focusing on those institutions that are doing the best job right now and helping them to increase those numbers. We're pleased that we're replicating Malhoff with funding from Howard Hughes at Chapel Hill and Penn State, and with Zuckerberg money for Berkeley and San Diego. So increasing the number of students in the most successful institutions, replicating what they are doing, and then doing what your book talks about, bringing people together to see how they can start these kinds of programs. It's only through those three things can we really move the needle. I want to stop right there and leave you with the thought that when you took your vaccination, the fact is, if it was either Pfizer or Moderna or Johnson & Johnson, that technology was developed by a Malhoff scholar, first Black woman in the world to create a vaccine. That gives me goosebumps, all right? So from that person to the lead neuroscientist in 2019 in the world, young neuroscientist who's created a pacemaker for the brain, Dr. Kafri Zarasa at Duke, give you those two examples of what's possible. From creating a vaccine to making a big difference in mental health. Thank you. Ready to have questions and conversation.
Dr. Hrabowski, thanks so much. I think you have given us a real starting point for this conversation by laying out all of those details. So thank you. So to our audience, the way that this will work is that Dr. Hrabowski and I will engage in a conversation for the next 15 to 20 minutes. And then we'll also open up the opportunity for you to ask a question. So if you have a question, please put it there in the Q&A chat, and I'll try to get to as many as we can. Dr. Hrabowski, I love that you just mentioned the top producers, because again, that narrative is often not known. Now, I was wondering, can you talk about the importance of us spending some time on that narrative so that people know who's actually producing these individuals?
It's so important because we can all be involved in activities and a lot of energy can go into it. But again, as a mathematician, I can say this: until you get to the answer, until you know what really happened, what the real deal is with outcome, it doesn't make a difference. We've had so many activities over these years. Since 2011, when we wrote the report on underrepresentation for the national academies, we've gone from 2.2% of all the PhDs going to African Americans in natural science and engineering to 2.3. In other words, we have not moved the needle at all. When talking about bachelors, it's still in the 6% level for Blacks and about 8% for Hispanics. So with all the activities going on right now, we are not moving the needle. We've got to be transformative. And then getting at this list, you know, you heard me say those first institutions. I went down through MIT, but then there's Chapel Hill in Florida State and Georgia Institute of Technology, Urbana-Champaign, my alma mater, Ann Arbor. They're all in that between 15 and 20. And then you go to Tennessee State and the CUNY, City College, LSU, Oakwood, Clemson, NC State, Rutgers, Alabama A&M, Cornell, Prairie View, and Virginia Tech. Now that's the list. Wow. That's the list. You see which HBCUs are there. And I want to say this. I'm very proud of the public HBCUs. Those of us who are graduates of what we call the most prestigious of the HBCUs. We know my beloved Hampton and Howard and Morehouse and Spelman and Xavier. We are accustomed to being in that top group. The other institutions have done well all along, but now they are really helping to lead the way. When you think about my sister institution, Morgan, and Florida A&M and A&T and Jackson State, all in the top 10, that's a wonderful story. That's a wonderful story about progress and increasing those numbers in institutions that have not always had all the publicity that the prestigious places get. And it also says a lot to parents about the possibilities. But I also want to give a shout out to some of these predominantly white institutions who are doing better at this point. And you're starting with, as I said, University of Florida. really has, they do a better job than anybody when you put both Blacks and Hispanics together. They really do, and people don't know that. There are people, Warren Gilbert, who is a mentee, a brilliant chair of computer science at University of Florida, making a difference there. You know what I mean? Those kinds of different, and there are others who've done just that, who worked really hard to make a difference there, Henry and others. So what I would say is, when you find some people who have influence on an institutional campus and some power, that gives you the context in which you can talk about having an effective program.
Yeah, and as a college president, I imagine that the commitment to this has to really come from the top, right?
It does.
So talk a little bit about that as well.
There's no doubt that presidents and provosts and deans make a big difference. They are not the only, they are necessary, but not sufficient, meaning we've got to have the right faculty members. Of course, we're going to have supportive staff members who are helpful, but where's the power in the academy? It's with your top leaders, administrators, and especially with your scientists and your faculty. For example, when I'm working with my campus and we're trying to increase the number of Black faculty, Hispanic faculty on the campus in all these disciplines, the only reason we've been able to make some progress is because of certain programs. Our STRIDE program, which really does get powerful faculty, including white men. Women usually are more supportive of these efforts, but getting white men who are also supportive to play a major role as champions, bringing in people and then giving them support. Because it's not just about, think about it for a minute, it's getting people to do well enough in undergrad, they can go to grad school, do well, then usually a postdoc in many cases, but having someone who's going to be an advocate and champion even beyond that. I always say, until the person gets tenure, that person needs extra support. And when you're the only one in a department or one of two, it's really hard. And so what we've done with our Meyer program, we now have people, I've got 4 Black males on the faculty down at Duke right now. Really proud of them, very proud of them in the medical school. 3 MD PhDs, 1 MD JD. But the faculty in other places, the head of residence at MD Anderson, young Black woman, wonderful, who is now tenured in radiation oncology, bioengineering at Stanford. But all of these students and the graduates have found people to be supportive of them. So when we talk about the academic pipeline, it does go all the way across the board, but it means support at every level. And is the institution being supported? We know which graduate programs have the greatest amount of support depending on the discipline. It's important to know that also, very important. And most important to look at the products. Who are the people who are succeeding? And what I would argue is that successful programs don't just produce people at the bachelor's level and the PhD level, but people who want to give back. Let me just give you one example. Dr. Zarasa that I mentioned has in his contract at Duke that he will, and he's in neuroscience, he will come back to UMBC one day a month to mentor students, to bring more Black students from UMBC to Duke. That's in his contract. You get what I'm saying? That's what you call structural, where it's a part of what he's doing regularly, in addition to his research and all of that, of bringing the next group along and getting them into summer internships and then watching them and supporting them as they move to a faculty position and giving them support there. Dr. Mike Summers, who is our Howard Hughes investigator and member of the National Academy of Sciences, who's white and is on the cover of one of my books, Holding Fast to Dreams. I got him there because I want people to see that there are white males in this country who are doing this kind of work. People need to see that. He works with universities around the country, not only in replication, but in helping Mayhaws, undergrad through grad, who will be going to faculty positions, and then to give them the support as they go through that process, 5 or 6 years of the funding and potential tenure. So you need that extended role for the people to play, not just as mentors, but as champions. Champions.
Yeah. When we talk about academic pipeline programs, you note that, again, outcomes is really important. What difference do they make? But you also write in the foreword to the book, which I found very interesting, you said replication is also important. And you say, if an initiative is truly successful on one campus, the ultimate test is whether the program can be replicated in other places. And certainly you've done that with the Meyerhoff Scholars Program, but can you talk a little bit about the importance of replication?
Yes. I mean, the biggest criticism Meyerhoff got in the first years was, well, that's because they got a Black president and Freeman is there. And while that might sound complimentary, no, it shouldn't be that way. I mean, I'm honored that people think that, but the only reason Meyerhoff has worked is that faculty and and colleagues, administrators, have taken ownership of it. Let me give you an example. There are years when we don't get the money. People think we've got a lot of money. We've been building an endowment, but it's nothing like what it should be. And because we're neither Harvard nor Howard, we've not gotten one of those big gifts. We have not. People are not accustomed to our model, just being honest. So there are years when we have more money and we can bring in more students than other years when we have to cut back because we don't have the money. Now, why is that important? We needed to make a decision to put a certain amount in the base so that regardless of what the outside funding is, we can keep the program going. And a part of my role as president has been to have people who believe that is important, and they've done that. So we have put substantial money in the base. So regardless of federal money, the program will all, when I'm gone, the program, it sounds like I'm dead, but I mean, when I retire, when I leave here, the program will continue on. We've got that, and then we've got an endowment. I mean, this is what you call institutionalizing the program. So we've done that kind of thing. And the last part, though, is, and then to have a premier faculty member serving as the key person to replicate, Dr. Mike Summers, and then the head of the Meyer program, who is wonderful, Keith Harmon, and the Dean of Undergraduate Education, a scientist, Dr. Catherine Cole. All of them work as a team to help other institutions. And I had to make this point to others. You don't have to be Black to be an effective president in helping with minority students. Yes. You get what I'm saying? It's important. And the people who worked at Chapel Hill and at Penn State were not minorities, and yet they've done a great job. They really have. And the same thing when we go out to California, what they're doing. It's about commitment. That's the point.
Yeah. Are you surprised by how the Meyer Hall program just kind of took off? And again, the fact that so many people are looking at it, examining it, using it as a model. I'm just curious your thoughts about that.
You know, Bob Meyerhoff is now 97 years old. Wow. He's an MIT graduate, and he's been an amazing, amazing donor to the program, not just about money, but giving of his soul, everything. And so we both say we never could have imagined the level of success we've come to because we had not seen it. Predominantly white universities are not accustomed, still are not, for the most part, accustomed to seeing dozens and dozens of Blacks going on and becoming a part of the professoriate. It's still an experiment. We've got a long way to go. We really do. That's number one. What surprises me is that we have done so well and have set a standard for the country, and we get some funding from the national agencies in their traditional programs, the BILL program, for example, the URISE Mark Star program. We've had the LSM NSF program, but the funding is small, is no money compared to what it should be. This is the point. When you talk about producing Black scientists and Latino scientists, we should have this as a #1 national priority, which can make all the difference in the world. And it is not. And because when something is a priority, when COVID was a priority, we've put billions of dollars into that, as we should. Well, thank God you got a Dr. Kismikia Corbett, my graduate, who can show a lot of women and people of color and little Black kids that you can be a Black woman and create a vaccine. We've got to be able to show that we're in this process. As an Alabamian, knowing a lot about that syphilis study, the Tuskegee study, I know a lot of people do not trust the scientific community. The only way we can build trust is to have representation, to say, look at this Dr. Corbett from Hillsborough, North Carolina, and what she's doing now at age 35, that we are alive because of her. We need so much more of that. You know, I am so proud that even what we call the Mecca, we all love Howard, and the other HU, as Tony would say. Wayne will tease me about that. But the fact is that I am so proud of two things. One, their provost at Howard is a UMBC graduate. I'm very proud of that. And number two, their CARDS program that they've gotten wonderful funding for was modeled after the Meyerhoff model, and the head of that program is also a UMBC graduate. So the idea of producing leaders of different types who can go into all kinds of institutions, from the predominantly white to the HBCUs, and do the same thing, care about our students and build the model. That is the notion that should be, quite frankly, funded at a level that will have us doing more and replicating that all over the country. That's what we need. And I'm talking about more than dimes, nickels and dimes. When it's a priority, people talk about hundreds of millions, billion, because that's the future of our society.
Yeah, no doubt about it.
Yeah.
I want to again remind the audience that you can put your question in the Q&A. We want to try to get to as many as we can in a few minutes. Dr. Hrabowski, you talked a little bit about the importance of building community And I love the example that you gave where, again, the freshmen are calling themselves doctors. And I think that's really important. It's this idea that if you can imagine it, you can see it, you can achieve it, that kind of thing. Can you talk a little bit again about the importance of community building, particularly as it relates to these programs?
Two things I want to tell you. I give NSF credit for having science programs in the 60s when I was a little Black kid coming out of the civil rights movement, having spent time in jail with Dr. King, loving math at the same time. And I went to Tuskegee, my mother's school, in the summer program in NSF. And it was there that I saw my first Black PhD in mathematics. He put a problem on the board, nobody could solve it. Other kids were older than I, and they got really upset. They said, he's not a good teacher. I said, no, he just thinks we can do it ourselves. We did finally solve it, but they said, his name is, and they said, doctor, and they said his name. And I said, he's not a physician. They said, no, he's a PhD. And I said, what's a PhD? They said, oh, that's the highest degree you can get. I said, I'm going to get a PhD. So beginning at age 13, every morning, I'd look at my little fat face in the mirror and I'd say, good morning, Dr. Ribowski. So I have taught students for years, look in the mirror and say it and own it. I've told my colleagues at 40 when they're in grad schools, write it down and say it to yourself. You got to see it. If you can see it and you're willing to work hard enough, you can do it. So that building of community, if people haven't seen this 60 Minutes piece on the Meyer program, look at that. It's about the boot camp the summer before. Believe it or not, we take their phones from them. I got more hate mail from people saying, how dare you take them? Parents wrote and said, thank you. But I mean, just building community in different ways can make it. So look at the Meyerhoff model. But the other thing is that's not just for the undergrad experience. We have a graduate Meyerhoff program. And again, it's about building community, having people connect with each other. And at UMBC in general, that has worked so well that we have communities of people in languages, of women in IT, in the humanities. And in all those cases, we are building a culture of thinking about talking ideas and envisioning becoming a professor or a leader or a researcher in a given discipline. There's something about that. One of the pipeline programs that I ran at Illinois when I was a grad student was Upward Bound, Project Upward Bound, to get more kids through college. Wonderful program. I got the idea of Bridge program from having been a tutor counselor at Hampton and then a grad running the program at Illinois. And so a part of Meyerhoff, getting that Bridge program idea summer before the freshman year, comes from that program. So pipeline programs can influence each other at different levels. Very important. Our Sherman Scholars Program is to produce math and science teachers, building community. You see, so that idea of community can work at every level, including the NSF Advanced Program. The recommendation we made in our report was there's a wonderful NSF Advanced Program to have more women on the faculty in science and engineering. Great idea. I was PI for hours with several women co-PIs here, but we have recommended having that for people of color. There is no program like that. NIH has some initiatives now, starting in that way, but NSF needs to have a program for faculty of color in the same way we have a wonderful program for women. We've not gotten there yet.
And I'm wondering, in terms of collaboration between these programs that exist, I mean, do you see a need for more collaboration, more working together, particularly as we think about, again, the K through 12 and then advancing all the way through the doctoral level?
Oh, very much so. We do need much stronger collaboration. There is some, but nothing like what it should be. We need more teeth in our K through 12 programs. If you look at UMBC and our Lakeland Consortium programs, we're working to build the skills of students. I mean, everybody can talk about working with K through 12. Question I want to ask is, so with the programs you have, can you tell me that the children are reading at the proficiency level? That's the bottom line, because the majority of Black children and Latino children in most school systems are not reading at proficiency level, even after all the hustle and bustle and the activity. What we focused on with our Sherman Scholars Program is making sure we get them up to the state average. Wow. And that's a big deal. When in Baltimore and in big cities, maybe 20% are at proficiency. We're trying to get that to 50 or 60%. So, and so talking with other institutions about what they're doing, looking at what we're doing. I like at Clemson, my graduate, Jim Clemens is president of Clemson, and he's been with this idea of Call Me Mister, a program for young Black males to produce teachers. Is another excellent example of building community among people to look at teachers and getting more, because we have a serious problem with a shortage of Blacks in the K through 12 system in terms of teachers, and especially Black men. Especially Black men and men of color. So we need communities that will aspire, communities of young people aspiring to be teachers, aspiring to be professors, aspiring to be in the sciences and in other areas.
Yeah, yeah. We have some questions that have come in. I want to get to a few of them. One is, what are some of the tools that can be implemented to enhance faculty efforts, drive student performance and engagement, and ensure increased completion outcomes?
Very good. So I would tell you to look at our first Chemistry Discovery Center at UMBC, and then at the Faculty Professional Development Initiatives focused on infusing, and our pivot program, especially with the use of technology for hybrid experiences, and the emphasis we're placing on collaboration among the students. So look at those initiatives. And then we've gone over the last 20 some years, we've gone from 35% graduation rate 6 years to 70%.
Wow.
With another 15% who leave because of certain programs we don't have. So, and that has come because of not just Meyerhoff, but a lot of efforts focused on having teachers, faculty understand how students are doing. We need to use analytics far more consistently in understanding performance, in assessment, to say in Cal 1, how are students doing by race, by gender, first generation college? Are there differences among sections and among faculty? Not to point fingers at people, but to understand what is working and what is not working. But it's getting to the level of granularity within a course, across sections, for different groups that will allow an institution to decide what strategies might be best. And so for us, one example was some of our students of color, a number coming from community colleges, were not doing as well in technical areas. We needed to devise certain strategies, such as having successful students of color, males of color, for example, serving as an advisory group and giving advice. Because one of the problems was some of the guys come in, as we know, and they don't want to take as much advice. You tell them they need to start at this level, and they say, no, I got this. And they go to that. And so we finally got to the point of saying, yeah, you got this D you're going to get if you don't do what we say, but you got to keep it real with them, right? So strategies of that kind, about specificity, certain groups, new students, transfer students, students of color, first generation college students in disciplines. And the place where students do the least well will be in the STEM courses. We know that. Then there are selected areas. Sometimes, Dr. Mason, in early years, we had some challenges in psychology because people came in thinking they'd had it in high school. It wasn't hard. They get to college, they realize there's a lot of reading and thinking and writing, and they took it for granted. So things like that can be very, so not just the typical STEM, but psych, which can be a STEM also, is one of those areas. Just like accounting can be one of the areas, or languages. And in every case, it's understanding the problem. Not about anecdotal, but trends, the analytics of it, and then having the tough conversations.
And I imagine that many institutions are sometimes afraid of having those tough conversations because it requires a mirror on themselves and recognizing that they may not be as far along as they think.
And it's very sensitive. I've been to institutions, predominantly white institutions in the country, that have admitted that quite frankly, they give students of color, Black kids from an urban area, an extra point. So if the student gets a C, they give them a B because they just think that background wasn't. And I had to say, I was appalled. No, we have to give students the support they need. But the worst thing we can do is to give students something and have them believing they're at a certain level if they're not at that level. Because who wants a doctor who isn't able to pass the test at a certain level? It says, who wants a teacher who can't read well, right? So it's about, and what I'm telling you is reality, that there are places where people are thinking they're doing the right thing by being liberal, but not realizing the right thing is to give people the support they need to come up to the standard. It's not to just give them an extra grade because they're Black and coming out of a city. That does not do it.
And that liberal kind of racism can be
without even realizing how they're hurting the student who believes she or he knows more than the student really does.
Absolutely. We have another question. Is there any data differentiating the percentage of US born from immigrant or foreign born Black and or Latinx undergraduate and graduate degree recipients at US colleges and universities?
It's a great question. It is not separated as much as one might want, but there are major differences. I can give you the trends. The fact is that a student who has parents from another country, whether the student is Black, white, or Asian, or Latino, will tend to be higher performing than somebody who's been in this country for generations. Now that's the reality, and it's especially true in science and engineering. And we do talk about that. The tough conversations is to talk about disaggregating the data. When somebody says, oh, the student is first generation college, well, it's not just that, but what's the student's background? If the student is from a family where the parents have said, listen, we died to get here, we did everything, you better get this done and whatever, and the student accepts what the parent says, that student's gonna work harder. But if the student is from a family that's felt beaten down for generations, and they are not accustomed to that level of intensity in academic work, student is not going to be at that level. Or if the student is not as old-fashioned, quite frankly. I mean, I look at my Caribbean students. We've got Caribbean students here and Caribbean American students here, and they are very different. The student comes directly from Barbados, is quite British, and yes, sir. How high do you want me to jump? Right? The student who's been here for a generation, what's up, Doc? Yeah. Why do I have to do that? Right? I love them both. But there is a difference. It just depends, right? And the same thing in a Latino population. I mean, depending on where they're from. And and I'm sure that all of my students will tell you culture and family background, and in addition, academic preparation will make a difference. The biggest challenge we face will be students who have been in this country for generations, often in poverty, not having the support, or in communities where they've had to deal with trying to stay alive. You see, more than anything else. We supervise we're in the suburbs here in Baltimore County by the BWI airport. We supervise 500 children 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And we've been doing it 35 years. We've been evaluating the program all that time. These are first-time offenders, mainly boys of color, heavily Black, some Latino, a few girls who are in gangs, nonviolent crimes. And literally, we get them up in the morning, they're in school during the day, we have people go and supervise, we bring them on campus in the evenings, and then we get them up the next day. Okay, it's called the Choice Program. People can look it up, the UMBC Choice Program. And it's in partnership with the Department of Juvenile Services. And I tell you that because we learn so much from those children. We learn so much. Now, are those kids who are going to come to UMBC? Often not. There have been a few, but we work to get them into post-secondary opportunities. They come through Upward Bound, for example. We're still building the skills. All right. You know, they're between 8 and 15. And what I will tell you is that we learn so much about what it takes. Sometimes there's a grandmother who has all the strength or whatever, and she's taught that boy to listen to advice. And you see the difference. You see, you know, in other cases, they just haven't had that level of direction. And we're working to understand what we can do. Or they've been traumatized, another part of it, by the violence and all of that. And it's the difference between being in a community where you see people killed versus being out here at UMBC where you got 600 acres and the first time they've seen green grass everywhere and seeing kids of all races around there. So bringing children to campus and letting them see people like themselves, and to see a basketball student who's taking calculus, who spends a few minutes with them, you know, can make a big difference, really can. But those are the critical issues we face. And that the person's question is on point, that there's no doubt that Blacks who come from around the world typically are higher achieving than most Blacks in this country. I like to say those of us from the Deep South are often more high achieving. And we have been taught, you've got to be twice as good. Our Northern cousins were somewhat condescending towards us for years. And when you go in the North, when you go to Chicago and other places, you will see a lot of Blacks who come out of HBCUs and who have that same mindset as people from the islands. I've got to be twice as good. That intensity, you see. You know, some people don't like me saying that, but go around and watch it and you'll see it. You really will. That's not to say that my students from northern states don't do well. I don't mean that. But I am saying historically, it has been amazing to see why HBCUs have done so well. And it has to do with a culture that says you've got to be twice as good. And that's, I like saying, by the way, that UMBC is Hampton North. I have many sons and daughters of kids from some of the HBCUs because we have that kind of culture here that I was taught at Hampton.
Yeah. I want to try to squeeze in two more questions if I can. The one from Daryl Brown says, how do we combat wokeism that equates things like following instructions as racist? It appears that as professors of color, we are teaching students with a predisposition to rigor is racism. Interesting question.
Yeah, I think it's a question that speaks volumes within itself. It is true. It's so easy to fall into a category of either being woke or not woke, or of going along with what everybody thinks or not. Now, there are some parts of wokeness that we would all agree to, and when thinking about how we view ourselves, how we want the world to be better. But when talking about strategies and talking about values, we as professors of color and professors in general must help our students understand this is what the world will expect from you. And even when you come to that level, there's going to be more you're going to have to do about inner strength, because the world is not fair. Structural racism is real. It's a part of our society. It really is. But at the same time, as I tell my students, you don't want anybody else to define who you are on any side. And you must work to be the very best. You do not become someone who creates a vaccine or somebody who really helps kids learn to read well if you don't work to be the best yourself. And when students sometimes say, Doc, it's too hard, I'm saying, I'm so glad to hear that. I'm so glad to hear that, because the harder it is, quite frankly, that means the more you're learning. And what we want to do is to love you enough, give you enough support that you can come up to that level. It's not like saying, I got mine, you got to get yours. No. With my Harper, with our other programs, we're saying it's going to be hard. It's going to be tough, but we are here. We will work together. You work with us, you're going to succeed. My line to freshmen is this: look at the student to your left, look at the student to your right. Our goal is to make sure all three of you graduate. In most colleges, even in all HBCUs and others, they always say, look left, right, one of you will not graduate. That's a bad message to give to students. No, we've got to say, you're going to graduate and you're going to work really hard to get there. Rigor is a part of excellence. And I refuse to allow any race to say they own excellence. This is why, for us, inclusive excellence is a part of our DNA. We expect the most from all kinds of students.
No, well said. And I guess the final question I have is, you've outlined the challenges, certainly for us. You've given us a roadmap of where we go next. But you also appear very, very hopeful. And I was wondering, can you talk a little bit about that hope?
Oh, yeah. My students and colleagues give me hope every day when they say things like, it's amazing to see how enthusiastic the students are coming back in person, for example. When the students say to me, Doc, I want to create a vaccine one day myself. When a student comes to me saying, can you introduce me to Dr. Zarasa? Because I want to understand more about this mechanism he uses in neuroscience to help with mental health, and that I'm going to be an MD, PhD too, right? When I'm studying French right now, I have for years, when my students come up to me speaking in French, and I love their correcting mon prononciation, all the time. The idea that young people can dream about the possibilities. We, as we get older, if we're not careful, we are the ones who become cynical to say, been there, done that, or it's never been this bad. Yeah, it has been this bad before. Yeah. When I grew up, I couldn't drink out of the water fountain. Yeah. For some Black children right now, there is no water fountain. But no, things are not. We are silly if we think things are as bad as they were. They are bad in many ways, but we've seen progress. We go up, we go down, and that's what gives me hope, is we always come back. That is the human spirit. And when I think about African-Americans and others and what we've been through and what our forebears went through, how dare we? How dare we suggest that? We're not getting our backs whipped now. Yeah, we should be hollering loud when we kill each other, when police kill us. We need to be saying, this is very bad. This is very bad. But we need to talk about what we can do. This is why my choice program is so important, to keep these boys safe and to know there is a better way for you. That's the hope we have to have. We have no choice, because if you don't believe there's hope, why don't you just go ahead and die? That's because, you see, you live when there's hope. And the one thing I've learned with my faith is that the older we get, the more humble we should become, but the more hopeful we must be.
Yeah, no, well said. Before I turn it over to my colleagues, I just want to say, Dr. Hrabowski, you announced that you would be retiring after a wonderful storied career, and I certainly want to salute you on that career. You have certainly been a mentor to so many. And for those of us who have studied your career and your introduction to the civil rights movement as a child from Birmingham in the 1950s and 60s, we are all so proud of all that you have accomplished. So thank you. And I also want to thank Dr. Byrd and Dr. Mason for their vision and leadership in creating this wonderful needed resource. I would encourage you all to go out and get it right away, because it's really important. And Diverse Issues in Higher Education, now in its 37th year of existence, has long been committed to covering these academic programs and will continue to do so. In fact, in Diverse Issues in Higher Education's top 100-degree producer special report, Georgia State University, where Drs. Byrd and Mason are, has consistently ranked as the top producer of African Americans with bachelor's degrees among nonprofit institutions and many other disciplines and degree levels. And I expect that to continue under the bold and visionary leadership of Georgia State's new president, Dr. M. Brian Blake. With that, again, thank you all, and I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Byrd to take us home.
Well, thank you all both. Thank you, Dr. Hrabowski, for sharing those nuggets and gems. Thank you for sharing sort of this analogy about the mirror. I saw it three ways: the mirror to see what's happening at our own institutions, our campuses, the mirror looking at ourselves, having the examples from alumni who have gone through these programs, their examples, so that we can see who we can be. Yes. And so thank you for sharing that. And then also that mirror that we're showing back much earlier to those who are in the K through 12 system, how they can come into the academy as well. I also want to thank you for making mention of the value of our book and the Thrive Index. We hope that we have one example of creating visibility of these programs on campuses, and especially through the use of our Thrive Index, so we can show these relevant dimensions. We know that cataloging is just one way of bringing awareness and creating that visibility, but it's standardizing it in a way that we can engage in data-driven decision-making. And so we hope that you'll continue to help us and other institutions strategically plan forward. Dr. Byrd?
Okay. Well, I just wanted to say before I give my final remarks, and again, thank you so much, Dr. Hrabowski and Dr. Watson, for your insights here. What we really tried to do in this publication is show what the best practices are among these 21 hallmark initiatives. And we deliberately went out and found the top tier initiatives that we've been talking about all day today, to kind of show in a very concise and regimented way what these programs do that will elevate us from pre-K or K through 12 all the way through college, through graduate and professional school, and into faculty positions. There was a question that were in regard to what types of faculty initiatives are out there, and I'd be remiss to make sure that we don't say there are faculty initiatives doing this work too, such as the National Centers for Faculty Development and Diversity, NCFDD, Carrie Ann Rockamore's program. These types of initiatives really are setting the gold standard, as well as the Meyerhoff Scholars, at each level of the pipeline that will bring us through and get us to where we need to go. So thank you so much again for helping to make there be more of an awareness of these types of initiatives. I would like to say in ending that we would like to recognize the early adopters of the Thrive Index and database programming, Georgia State University and the diversity database system that we've created at Georgia State. 150 some odd programs that have been reviewed, critiqued, and given analysis to of our DEI initiatives, as well as the National Science Foundation STEM undergraduate success program that's housed at Morehouse, and all the partners that go with that. We're doing incredible work by using the Thrive Index to review STEM initiatives at HBCUs. And we have a new institutional partner in the University of Georgia as well. So we're building out their platform in terms of showing their diversity initiatives as well. These websites can all be found in the chat. We're looking for more institutions and programs who are interested in using our Thrive Index and assistance with cataloging and critiquing their DEI programming. If you're interested in joining the Academic Pipeline Project, you can reach us at academicpipelineprograms.com. Again, that's Academic Pipeline Programs with an S, and that should be out there as well. Finally, we would like to thank our amazing panelists. Dr. Freeman Hrabowski, the president of University of Maryland, Baltimore County, and a dear friend and colleague and mentor to so many of us, as well as Dr. Jamal Watson, editor of Diverse Issues in Higher Education. We thank you so much for taking the time to showcase our work in diverse issues as well. Also, we would like to give a shout out to Lever Press, who graciously published our book, Academic Pipeline Programs, Diversifying Pathways from the Bachelor's to the Professoriate, which is now available at leverpress.org. That should be in the chat as well. So thanks again to Sage Publishing, and thank you to everyone for being a part of this discussion, this robust conversation today. Thank you again for our panelists.
Great. Thank you. Keep hope alive.
Thank you so much.
Okay. Bye-bye. Congratulations.
Thank you, sir.